Travelers no need to quarantine anymore. They have to show negative proof, of course, of a test within 72 hours. For more, Colin Furness is my guest, an infection control epidemiologist. He's also an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. Colin, good to see you again.
Good afternoon.
So what do you make of this? The border announcement, does it make sense? Any concerns?
I think there's been so much privation, so many people who need to travel and who haven't, who felt that they shouldn't because they were told not to. I think it's a reasonable thing to do to allow that. I think the rule that people need to be vaccinated and they need to have a negative test, I think this is great. I would, if it were up to me, do it slightly differently because people can forge credentials. There isn't one standard way of doing things. We've standardized passports internationally. We haven't standardized vaccine certificates. I would do a finger prick antigen test to see if people have antibodies. And it's a very, very fast, easy, cheap test. I would do that. I think then you know when you're letting people in that they have protection. But in principle, I like the idea of opening borders and doing it carefully.
The skeptics who might say, should we be doing this in the middle of a fourth wave? What do you think?
Well, the fourth wave is being driven by people who are not vaccinated. And so, to me, open borders are fine if everyone is demonstrably vaccinated. Not that they claim to be, not that they pretend to be, but they are demonstrably vaccinated, which is, again, why I would like to actually do a blood test, a simple finger prick test. So as long as we're careful and we're not letting people in who are not vaccinated, I don't see a problem.
Tell me about the first day of school as well and what you'll be watching for as students, many of them, head back to class.
Well, this is a very different story. I think borders are a lot safer than schools at the moment. And I say that because we are not requiring teachers to be vaccinated. I think any teacher who goes to work and isn't vaccinated is taking an enormous risk and putting their students at risk, but we're not requiring it. We're not requiring that students over 12 be vaccinated. Again, creates a huge amount of risk. And I think what's on a lot of people's minds, of course, is the large gatherings of kids under 12 who cannot be vaccinated. That's dangerous. That's just risky right there because, again, how super spreader events happen is when you have a lot of unvaccinated people in one place. So there's a lot of concern out there. I totally understand why.
Outbreaks are going to happen. Cases will enter schools. Is there some way to try and better mitigate that from your perspective?
Well, schools that have the means, and by which I mean private schools, have been I think, doing a lot with ventilation. I think public schools have been doing not nearly as much. The province has provided free rapid tests to private schools and none at all to public schools, which I think has everybody baffled. So I think equalizing that would be a good start. But also, I'd like parents to check in with their kids about their mask habits. Does the mask fit well? Do they understand? The mask is now to protect kids from other people. It's not so much to protect other people from them. This is different than it was last year. Is the mask being worn well? Does it fit properly? Do kids really understand what an important piece of safety equipment this is? Because once kids are out of sight of the parents, you really have to trust that the kids are taking it seriously, and I think it's an important conversation to have.
Yeah, speaking of important conversations, Quebec announcing today that for healthcare workers, social workers, they must be vaccinated by the middle of October or else they'll be suspended without pay. Your take on whether that makes sense, is that the beginning of what we're going to see elsewhere? Should we see that elsewhere?
I would actually do it a little bit differently. I would never want to fire anyone for not being vaccinated. I think when you do that, you end up with protesters throwing rocks, which is what we're seeing. I would rather say if you want to have contact with patients, if you want to have contact with kids, if you want to have contact with the people who you were trained to serve, then you need to be vaccinated. And if you choose not to be vaccinated, we can find you a job in the kitchen or in soiled laundry or in administration or teaching remotely or doing telephone support. We should be reallocating people according to their vaccination status and being compassionate, not punitive. But every child should have a vaccinated teacher. Every patient should have a vaccinated healthcare worker. So that's the way I would do it.
Thanks, Colin, for this. Appreciate your insights.
My pleasure. Thanks.